Dr. Lindsay, pleasure to have you back. I am flailing my way to an understanding here, but I do find some similarity. The culture of death, suicide for even for children now, they're proposing it. Suicide for people who just have some depression, suicide for people who want to, suicide for veterans, and then for those who live to be carved up, to feast on our children as some pagan demon might do. What the hell is going on?
Well, I think your understanding you're filing to would be best described under the concept of tacit knowledge. I don't know if you've heard of this concept, tacit knowledge. It's a very formal term that roughly means intuition. So what you're seeing is a set of things that are happening that are creating, connections in your mind that are not incorrect, that you don't have a vocabulary to understand or to articulate clearly. And so it rests in the realm of tacit knowledge. But I think your hypothesis or your hunch here is uncomfortably correct. I think that we're seeing, with the woke in particular, a complete rejection of Western culture. And kind of at the center of Western culture is the Judeo-Christian ethic. And by having a complete rejection of that, by throwing often its tenets back in its own face in our societies, we're seeing things that do look very much like child sacrifice, that do look very much like pagan, even ritual. And of course, we're seeing that celebrated, whether it was the Oscars or the Grammys or whatever else, we're seeing these kinds of very overt displays of I guess, a pagan kind of basis underneath this way of thinking. I don't think you're wrong in that suspicion.
That's incredible, and you're so right. I forgot about was that the Emmys or the Grammys or some award show where they had a full satanic ritual, unironically, and why? What's the market for that, or is it just those ancient ideas that are reasserting themselves? You called it tacit knowledge. Isn't that the truth? When I was talking to my friend Barbara Kay, who thinks about these things, I couldn't help but think of some ancient laws, the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder. There is only one God. These are essential pillars of our consciousness, our imagination, our culture. But obviously they replaced something before them. Obviously they corrected something. You don't bring in a law for no reason. You bring in a law to correct something. So obviously murder was rife beforehand. Obviously people did not honor their mother and father. Why would you make a law if they were? Were they killing them in an assisted suicide? What gods did they have that there needed to be a command to have only one? The Jews believe in another set of laws, Dr. Lindsay, I don't know if you know this, the laws of Noah, that the Jews believe apply to all people, not just Jews. They're basic laws for any human. One of them that sticks in my mind because it's so unusual is that you're not to eat the flesh of any animal that's not killed. Like you're not allowed to eat a live animal. That sounds so unusual, but obviously that law was brought in because people were doing it. And that level of cruelty, on the one hand, what do you care if the animal's alive or dead? You're going to kill it to eat it anyways. But on the other hand, it speaks to the immorality of the human, that you would do something so abusive and cruel. I think it was Kipling's, the gods of the copybook headings, all these ancient aphorisms. They're not even Christian. They're not even religious. I think they're pre-Christian, but they're just codes of right and wrong. I think of Jeffrey Epstein and the trafficking of children, and how high society covers it up. I think of Bohemian Grove and Alex Jones stumbling upon bizarre things. And I have to say, I think my worldview is being shattered. I think that the world is a lot darker than I ever thought it was. And I think that the demons are coming out of the dark and manifesting themselves in the light now, whether it's in Disney or the Grammys or in our school curriculums or on the street. And I'm going to stop rambling now, and I'm going to rely on you to help me figure out what is going on, what you call a tacit knowledge or an intuition. Help me put some structure to it. Help me with the vocabulary. Help me with naming things, because something's going on and it's deeply troubling me, and I need your help to name what's going on.
Well, if we read the literature, and I always like to turn to the literature, to the Marxist literature in particular that has been, published, especially the stuff that was published from the Frankfurt School guys in the United States following World War II. If we read through that, we have, for example, Eros and Civilization being written in 1955 by Herbert Marcuse. And he's very clear, actually. It's on, as I often do, I remember the page number for a strange reason. It turns out on page 211, he's explaining, or at least in the kind of standard copy, page 211 of my copy at any rate, he's explaining that he calls it in the Greek, he puts it in the Greek, orthos pederastin, which I'm sure I mispronounced, but it translates as correct pederasty, is in fact the road to higher culture. What you see actually is in these kind of pre-Christian cults where you see these laws that were being laid down and you wonder what was going on, is what you had was this obsession with obtaining power, the obsession with finding a god who would give you a shortcut to power and might and the ability to rule over others. And you had the Jewish religion come in and eventually the Christian religion come in and say, no, that's not right. You're going to be humble before God. You're not going to rule because God is sovereign. And you have a completely new ethic come in at that place. But in these earlier religions, these power-driven religions, what you have is very frequently rituals. And those rituals are supposed to confer power. And what Herbert Marcuse is writing about in that book is, in fact, that in pre-Socratic Greece, that these rituals were done very much so with kind of a sexual intent. And the goal is, in fact, to initiate children into sex while simultaneously initiating adults into a cult, which more or less can be regulated by blackmail, which I think makes the tie to Jeffrey Epstein and his island very clear, who are the stakeholders in our so-called stakeholder capitalism that we have. Well, I don't know, but I have a feeling that the way you become one is you go to Jeffrey's island or the equivalent, so that they can have blackmail and control you. The goal of this was supposed to be sexual liberation for Marcuse. The goal was to release the sexual energy, the libido, in order to become a creative force outside of the productive forces of capitalism or outside the productive forces of this of the society that we live in. And so you see this kind of return to those power-driven religions. You see this return to those to the rituals that are supposed to release the libido, and that requires sexual initiation, especially of young people. Now, of course, what that does is deranges them. It's very unhealthy for children to be sexualized, and they develop personality disorders, and then they can be driven to act quite wildly. And we see this, for example, in Nashville. Yesterday, there were these marches, thousands of children abandoning the schools, allegedly to, I don't remember, they were saying that we have to fight guns. We have to have gun control because one of the there was a shooting, of course, with a trans shooter. And my feeling, of course, is that they're trying to hide the fact that the shooter was trans by talking only about the guns so vigorously and vociferously. But what you see is this derangement in the young people who are not aware of what's going on in the world, but are willing to go take political action to raise what they call good trouble, which is a communist phrase. It means direct action under, a communist activism. And this is happening kind of all over the country yet again. It happened in 2020. We were all very aware of that. And the goal, I think, of these cultic religions is to release that, to pent up that energy in the children, the young people, and release it. This is what Mao Zedong did in China, not so much necessarily through transgender or anything like this, but through identity politics. He created identity categories and he worked up the children. And what do? They went out and they attacked their parents. They went out and attacked their teachers. They went out and destroyed the existing society. And I think we're seeing the exact same thing. We're tapping into children's desire for power and deranging them with it. And the Judeo-Christian ethic of the West, whether someone is Christian or Jewish or not, is kind of irrelevant, is a target because it encourages humility. It encourages turning the other cheek. It encourages a number of virtues, the meek shall inherit the earth and so on, that are being perverted so that Again, I just think that you're not wrong to suspect that this is a turn toward, whether you want to call them Babylonian pagan cults or whether you want to call it pre-Christian and point to the South American, human sacrifice cults. I think that woke has this inside of it.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. We rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.